Hello, this is Kimberly Adams-Mann from Shore West Realtors and TAMT Homes. And I am just going to do a little quick intro because we are cutting our interview with a home inspector into smaller portions. So this will be part number 2. And our home inspector that we opted to interview this time and that was willing to do the interview is Marco Celeste from Curb Appeal Home Inspections. So we're going to pick up where we left off before.
Provide what's called a recall check.
Well, and that's something that you provide. Not every home inspector is going to necessarily provide that.
That is something that we provide at Curb Appeal. And recall check more or less is a database of appliances and mechanicals that have outstanding manufacturer recalls. So as we go through the appliance, we're checking that to make sure that you don't have any outstanding recall for be it a safety concern or anything with that. And then we monitor those appliances and mechanicals going forward for as long as you own the home. So if 5 years down the road, there's a recall on a stove or refrigerator or whatever it might be, you'll get an email and it'll give you instruction on how to get a hold of that manufacturer for that repair or replacement, whatever they're offering.
Okay, so again, it kind of plays into the whole educate and inform the public even after the home inspection. So that's great because it kind of shows how you're looking out for the customer, not just during that home inspection, not just to get that home inspection, but also in their future maintenance of their house. All right, that's great. So do you check things like washers and dryers and dishwashers? Because I know some home inspectors don't, some do. Some say, well, I just check it a little, or, I mean, obviously a refrigerator, I mean, you're not putting a thermometer inside of it to check the temperature, but, you know, so what type of checking do you do on appliances that might be different than, say, you know, electrical panel, you're pulling the whole panel front off?
As long as the appliance is a permanent appliance, if it is a portable dishwasher or if it's a countertop microwave or something like that, then that's not an appliance that we would check. If it's a fixed appliance within the home, so refrigerator, a built-in dishwasher, garbage disposal, electric or gas range, washer and dryer, those are things that we will go through. We check the basic operation of them. We'll run a wash machine through a cycle. We'll turn on a dryer for a cycle and make sure that it's heating. As far as refrigerator, we'll check the temperature in the refrigerator to make sure that that's within parameters that it should be cooling. You don't look for any unusual noises or anything like that. Dishwashers, obviously checking to make sure we don't have any leakage and that goes through the cycles appropriately. Same with
I'm assuming like on gas stoves, you're also checking the gas connections as well to make sure there's no leaks.
That is correct.
Yeah, which is a very important, that's almost as important as the operation of it, is to make sure there's no leakage in the property.
You want to make sure that's perfectly safe for somebody to operate.
Yep, that's great. So kind of moving on a little bit, why, you know, what are you said you check a house from the top to the bottom. So let's talk about the top of the house and the attic.
Okay.
So what are you looking for in attics, and what do you do if there isn't like an attic access? Because there are some houses that aren't built that way.
Well, there definitely are some limitations on some homes during inspections, and attics can certainly be one of them. Unfortunately, some homes were constructed or possibly remodeled, and they've eliminated an attic access point. At that point, we have obviously limitations, and we don't have access to that area. In my view, that's not a good thing. There's a lot of important aspects of the home that we need to be able to see from the attic. So in that case, we have to note that we don't have access, and I guess at that point, it's anybody's assumption what might be going on in that attic space. I would say the bulk of the homes do have an attic access, which is a good thing. And what we're looking for are several different things. Obviously, we're looking at insulation level. Insulation housed in the attic there, that's going to help the overall comfort of the house. So we're looking to see where those levels are and that you have ample insulation. We're also looking to make sure that you don't have any types of insulation that might contain asbestos, which could be a health and safety concern for the occupant of the home. Most homes have a fair amount of electrical wiring that run through the attic space. So we're certainly looking to make sure that those connections are done correctly and safely. We're also looking at the underside of the roof at that point, looking at the roof decking or roof sheathing, if you will, making sure that we don't have any leaks into the house. So looking for appropriate ventilation, making sure especially bathroom fans, kitchen exhaust fans are vented out correctly, and we're not, pumping additional moisture into the attic space. So there's a fair amount that goes through your attic. In addition to that, obviously you have houses that still have a chimney. You have chimney chases that run through the attic. So obviously we're looking at those as we're going through that space. So fair amount of things in the attic.
Well, and I find that really interesting because a lot of people, and one of the reasons I wanted to ask you that question is because I think a lot of people focus so much on basements in a house and, whether there's any leakage or, this or that. And I think they forget that attics can be equally as important to the house, even though structurally they may not be important. They could be important on so many other levels towards health and safety.
Most definitely. With the attic, especially if you've had leakage in the attic space, I mean, that's always a possibility that we could have mold or potential mold growth on roof decking and such. So very important, equally as important in my view as what we're doing in the basement.
So I'm going to kind of skip a little bit forward in our questions just because we kind of have a natural segue here. So in Wisconsin, how often, let's talk about the basement. So we talked about the attic. Let's kind of go all the way to the bottom then and talk about the basement. How often do you see evidence of water in basements in Wisconsin, of course, is what I'm talking about, which is where you primarily practice?
It's somewhat common. I would say probably a quarter of the houses that I inspect probably have either active leakage or evidence of prior leakage. And that can be a magnitude of different things. Could be an isolated incident where somebody may have had a sump pump failure, or there might have been some type of backup that was an isolated incident, or it could be a chronic concern. Most of the time we find that it's water control issues on the exterior of the house.
Sometimes it has nothing to do with the actual basement itself as much as it has to do with the outside.
Correct. It's very important that you have proper drainage on the exterior of the house, and a lot of times that's where these problems stem from. Not having appropriate grading around the house, having a driveway possibly that's pitched towards the foundation, missing gutters or downspouts, different things like that. A lot of times that's where these water control issues stem from. Not always, but most of the time that's what we see. So, the older the home, the more potential I would say there is for seepage or leakage. Some of those systems in the older homes were quite a bit different than what we have today. A sump pump will be commonplace today in most basements, as opposed to a house that would be pre 1960. You would not see a sump pump typically in that house unless there's been some type of repairs or an addition of adding that system in. So
I know in my own house I have to have a wall in my basement needs to be fixed. It's nothing major at the moment, and it was my home inspector said monitor it, and I am monitoring it. But I also got quotes, and I was told when I get that wall fixed, I am going to have to put a sump pump in, even though we don't have one, because my house was built in like 1902.
Right, correct. Most of the time when you are doing foundation repair, if you have a home that does not have a sump pump system, code would require that a sump pump system would be installed at that point.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I know a lot of people freak out about the idea of having water in a basement as if it's the end of the world, or as if the house is to be written off just because there maybe was water before, whether there is currently or not. And so I know that basements can be really important to people. And I think everybody has to judge that. I mean, like I said, my basement, I actually get water pretty regularly into certain sections of it, but I know I have like things in place to make sure that doesn't become a problem. It's such an old basement that I just kind of let it run off. But that's my comfort level. And I know some people I mean, if you plan to finish your basement, that's not
Right.
acceptable at all.
And people have to have a realistic expectation on what they intend to use the basement for. You're
Yeah.
completely right. If you're buying an early 1900s house, or probably not a candidate for actually finishing the basement.
Yeah.
That wouldn't be
That's what we tell
recommended in
most
a
of our
home of that
customers.
age.
Yeah, that's what we tell most of our customers. Look, if you're buying a 1900s built house like ours, um, don't plan on finishing the basement because you may have to do an awful lot of things. And especially, I'm in the city of Racine, which is like house, driveway, house, driveway. It's very difficult to keep that drainage away, to drain away from the house because houses and so much hard surface surrounds the houses.
Well, most definitely. And, the older the building practices are, I mean, when you get into the brick and the field stone houses, I mean, the reality of it, those basements were never intended um, to be bone dry. I mean, they were not built that way. That wasn't the expectation, that basement was going to be used as any type of living space. So they might have experienced some seepage, higher humidity levels than we might see in other homes. So that's certainly something that people have to keep in mind when they're looking at that type of home.
Yeah, and I think especially with the fieldstone, that becomes kind of interesting because I've had some customers, and completely out of ignorance because they just had not been educated on it, and I sat there and educated them. The fieldstone, they're like, "Oh, but this wall isn't straight," and trying to explain to them that's because these are real rocks.
Right,
It's never
right.
gonna be straight.
Yeah, it's very both the old brick foundations and especially the fieldstone foundations. It's very common that you're going to see movement or a wall that looks like it's out of plumb, and a lot of them were originally built that way.
Yeah, or like the fieldstone. I mean, those are actual stones that they just kind of
Correct.
laid on top, and
Correct.
they didn't necessarily cut them up to be, completely straight or anything. It's not like concrete block or poured concrete,
Correct.
which is completely different. So let's kind of move on to some of the things we find in the basement. Most basements have things like that's where you'll find the electrical box or the mechanicals, and we'll talk about mechanicals in a minute. What do you think is the most common electrical problem that you run into when you're inspecting like that box and the systems in a house?
Electrical concerns are probably one of the things we see most on a home inspection. And concerns that we find most often, a lot of times, are amateur electrical wiring. Somebody decides they want to put in some outlets or switch or light or whatever it is, and not really with the knowledge that they should have to make that correct and safe. So we see a lot of that. Run into a fair amount of homes with ungrounded outlets. That's a big concern that we see very often. And then in the electrical panel specifically, we run into what we would call a double tap, more or less, and two circuits being handled by one circuit breaker. That's something we see fairly commonly. After that, I would say we're probably looking at oversized circuit breakers. Somebody having a breaker that's too large for whatever the service wire or the appliance that they're trying to operate.
So basically somebody kind of overdoing it rather than like thinking, oh, I can just get a bigger one because that'll just make it better. So why is
Correct.
that a problem?
Correct. Bigger isn't better in that regard, because if you just change the circuit breaker, everything downstream from that, if you will, probably is not set up to accommodate that. The size of the wire, or gauge of the wire as it's referred to, needs to match the amount of amperage that you want to put through it. So if you simply just change out a circuit breaker to a larger size, you're running the risk of fire, because the breaker won't trip, but the wire could melt or catch fire because it's not rated for that amount of amperage.
Yeah, so bigger is not always better.
Correct.
So let's kind of move on to the mechanicals. When I use the word mechanicals, what does that mean to you?
Mechanicals are typically the furnace, air conditioning, water heater, Those are the mechanical systems or major mechanical systems of the home, and that's what we typically see. Some homes may have a boiler system instead of a furnace. Obviously, that's the mechanical also, but those are our mechanical systems. And those are certainly things that we go through and check and inspect, obviously checking boilers and furnaces for any gas leaks or carbon monoxide issues, looking at the general maintenance, what's been done to those over time, giving the buyer an idea of the life expectancy, and kind of educating them on what the service looks like. The maintenance has been on it up to the point that we're inspecting it. If it's something that's seen annual service, or if it's something that we have no idea what the history is because it doesn't look like anybody's been there in a number of years. And then certainly taking the time to educate them on, changing filters and other things that go along with those systems.
Do you inspect things like water softeners, well pumps, things of that nature? Because obviously in the county we have some of those out there.
Water softener systems and well pump systems are something that is outside of the scope of the inspection.
Yeah, and I know typically in Wisconsin, as agents, we ask the seller to take care of that. That's historically been the case, but it's not always the case for everybody. So it's definitely something to consider if you're looking at purchasing or building a home out in the county where you're likely to run into those systems.